I've been around and involved in the Elixir community for about 4 years. I've contributed to Elixir, early days of Phoenix, and as well as like my own libraries. There's a few of them out there, including Coyote. I work at a company called Imbala Power Networks, and we build virtual power plants to manage renewable resources. This is actually a big problem. When you think about the typical power networks, it comes from a central station and the power gets pushed out. Well, all these are distributed, and so they kind of have to be grouped together and figure out how to manage problems, whether you need to pull power from the grid or push power to the grid. It creates some very interesting problems. Some of them kind of push some of Coyote was, we've got distributed assets all over the place, and we have tons of data coming in from these assets because they have to report in constantly, so we know exactly what their power levels are, what they can do and what they can't do, so that we can actually bid to give that cost-effective amount. You can't actually push an asset further than it can go, and you can't pull from it any more than it can give. Today, though, I hope to be a storyteller. Maybe not a storyteller in the sense that you guys are used to, more in the Native American tradition. See, in the Native American storytellers, they're much more interested in the truth of the story. And a great storyteller makes the truth of the story fit the needs of the content. Essentially, what you could say is that the truth is based on the context. And for all you developers out there, I'm sure you know the answer to most programming questions is, it depends. Yeah, everything's situational. I mean, you can always say, whatever the question is, well, what do you mean? What situation are you using it in? How is it? So I can tell you something that's the truth today, you give me different parameters tomorrow, and now that one's false, but another one's true. So now this isn't exactly a success story, but it's also not a failure. It's just a story. It's my story, and it's really about my curiosity and how I intend to indulge my curiosities in writing libraries. Does that mean you should go run out tomorrow and use Coyote in production? Yeah. No. It's on its way. It's stabilized. I started working on Coyote, mostly talking about it about a year ago, and then slowly over the course of the last year, I've kind of come and gone from it, and it's kind of funny. I know if you've ever worked on a library that you're trying to do something that you don't necessarily quite understand the problem exactly when you set out, you write some code, you step back, 6 months later, no. Later you come back to it and you're like, oh, shoot, I know more than I knew then, and now I know how to do it better. I'm hoping that as the project evolves, I'll continue doing that. So, what is Coyote? Well, that's a good question. We're going to get into it. But it's basically something that's evolved over time. In this talk, though, I'm actually going to mix in some Native American folklore. I hope that I do it justice. I try not to. I've actually consulted with people that I know that are Native Americans to make sure that I'm good with telling these stories, because I am not Native American. But I think there's some interesting things you can get from it. Now, these stories are going to probably seem out of place and not necessarily, you're going to be like, what? Why is he telling this story? But don't worry, I'll bring it all back around, and if you can't find the meaning behind it, I'll help you out. Worst case, they kind of break up the talk a little bit so you're not, bored. That being said, it's time for our first story. The story of the clever coyote. Now, way back once upon a time, there was a horrible beast, a horrible monster, that had a hideout in the mountains, and he grabbed up all the buffalo from the plains and took them up there. And he thought, I have my food forever. I never need anything else. Well, nobody else had any food. So the coyote pulled together all the people, and he said, we need to get the buffalo away from them so we have something to eat. And they're like, well, we don't know what to do. The coyote said, don't worry, I've scouted it out. There's a little boy that lives with the monster in the mountains. The people all immediately said, well, we can't hurt the little boy. No. But the little boy has to be lonely living up there in the mountains all by himself. He needs a pet. Why don't we send one of the animals up there? We'll send a mouse. So they sent a mouse. And of course, the monster was furious and sent the mouse away. So they came together and said, well, what are we going to do now? Let's send a bird. So they sent the bird. The monster got mad and sent the bird away. The coyote got smart. He said, you know what? I'll go. I'll go up there and see if I can scout it out, and then I'll help free the buffalo. Perfect. Well, he gets up there, and of course the boy immediately falls in love with the dog, because what little boy wouldn't fall in love with a dog? But the monster was furious and sent both of them away. The little boy looked at the coyote and he said, "You're probably so hungry," and he started getting sad. He loved the coyote so much, and he started to cry. Well, the coyote started to howl to comfort the boy. Well, this made the monster furious, but it also made the buffalo scared. So the buffalo started running around, and they started getting a little more active and active. When the coyote kept howling and howling, the more the boy cried, the more the coyote howled. Eventually, one of the buffaloes takes off. And of course, what happens when a herd of buffalo takes off? They all take off, and they all scattered out across the plains. And the monster was furious, and he went and he tried to track down all the buffalo, but he couldn't because they were spread out so far. Well, while the monster was gone from the cave, the warriors snuck into the cave and waited for the monster to come, killed the monster, and that's how the buffalo spread across the plain. So, what did I do, or what did I set out to do, versus what I discovered I wanted to do? I mentioned before that I've been in Elixir, working with Elixir for about 4 years. I also was one of the first few contributors to Phoenix, but something's always been kind of eating me about it. You know, one of the things that brought me to Elixir in the first place was my curiosity. You know, I wanted to learn more. I wanted to learn more about functional programming. Elixir at the time was very new. Not hardly any libraries out there. Hex wasn't even around yet. And so it was like this great new playground where you could build whatever you wanted to build. There was a curiosity and exploration. And don't get me wrong, Phoenix is great. But it kept troubling me that Phoenix felt like it was the same patterns we were doing, trying to implement MVC just in a new language. And there's nothing wrong with that. And it actually has done great to bring people to Elixir left and right. I see Jim back there. Hi, Jim. He does Elixir Phoenix Conference, and it's, every year doubles? And most of them are coming for Phoenix. There's nothing wrong with that. But it kept troubling me that, why isn't there another framework that does something different, that treats it different, that treats it more like an Erlang or something that would be run on the beam where you're actually just piping data through. It's not necessarily having to do with MVC, you're not dealing with controllers, you're not dealing with views. And one thing I kept coming back to was that Phoenix is a great presentation layer. My applications can do what they need to do. I just need something to get it to the web. But I don't always need something to get it to the web. Sometimes I just want to communicate between applications on the backside. So I found that I needed a way to do distributed computing. I wanted to be able to have separate nodes set up where I could build smaller applications that do one thing or do one thing well, and the only thing they do is they sit there and they run, and they know who they can talk to by passing routes to it, and then that lead server can actually push messages out to them and get messages back. Everything runs the same. As one thing goes down, it notifies the other and says, "Hey, I don't have a route for that anymore," and then you move on with life. If it comes back up, then it starts back up. I think this makes scaling applications much easier, too. If you have these small little applications running on different nodes, you can build a cluster and then run it on that. And you can add more power to this one particular piece of the application instead of worrying about all these other pieces. So the big thing is to be able to have what? A traffic cop. Time for the second story. So one day, the coyote was walking along, and it was a hot day. As he was walking along, he said, "You know what? I need a cloud. Give me a cloud so that I can be cool." And a cloud came. But it wasn't good enough. So he continued walking. He said, no, I need more clouds. I need a lot of clouds." And all of a sudden, the sky went black. "I'm still hot. I need rain." It started to rain. He said, "That's not enough. I need a stream. I need a lot of rain. I needed something that I can put my feet in." So the water came, and he put his feet in, but it wasn't enough. And so he got mad, and he said, "I need more rain. I need more water. Give me more." The river flew. Well, the coyote got swept up in the waves and got pushed way down the river. And all of a sudden, tumbling and tumbling and tumbling, he finally comes on shore, and then his vultures are circling around, and as they're circling around, he yells at them, "No, I'm not dead." And that's how the Columbia River came. Trust me, I was there. No. So, I embarked on the journey. The first thought was to make Coyote work with Cowboy. Everybody's used Cowboy here, right? Yes, we've all used Cowboy, right? We're all familiar with it. Cowboy's great. I'm not going to go into too much detail on Cowboy because I assume that you all know it. So, and if you don't, it's really easy to pick up how to use it. But remember I said that I don't necessarily want things going to the web. I want to be able to use the web, but I also want to be able to use just standalone backend services. So what I did was I actually have a routing table. As the new applications come along, they use the Coyote client. The Coyote client allows those applications to register with a node or register with a server on a different node or even on the same node. And then once that happens, then the actual routes are given to that leader server. The leader server can now service request and pass it off to those machines. It gets a response back, or if you're casting into it, you don't care about a response, you can just cast into it. It knows how to get to it. The routing table is basically managed in ETS. Now I know in Elixir 1.4, there's a registry to manage processes. It isn't confirming, it's not cross nodes, right? It's single machine, single node. And there's some other tools out there, of course, we'll talk about those later. But the idea was that we had a central server that could keep track of processes and nodes. So if a process goes down, it can get rid of the route because it can't service that anymore. And if a node goes down, it can get rid of all of the routes for it until that node comes back up, and then it can start servicing requests again. But remember, I didn't want to stop. There's nothing wrong with Phoenix. There's nothing wrong with Maru. They're both based on plug, and they do a great job of passing information onto the web. They can handle all sorts of things like stuff I don't want to deal with in Coyote, CSS, JavaScript, all that kind of stuff, rendering to the screen. Do all that in there. All I'm concerned about is connecting applications that can serve me data back. So in this case, you can actually turn off in Coyote the ability to communicate with Cowboy directly and actually use either whatever's coming in plug, whether or not you're using Maru or Phoenix. It'll actually register the routes itself. Those routes then get passed into the Coyote server, and then the Coyote server then services out to the applications. Messages are backed, you have your data. So really, Coyote kind of emerged from being what I thought was going to be a framework into really just a library to help communicate between nodes. Now, I'm getting ready to go into some code slides. Everybody loves static code slides, right? No, nobody likes static code slides. That shit's boring. Excuse my language, but it is. Don't worry, we're going to get through this real quick. Most of you know Elixir? Most of you know Erlang? Okay. So we're going to get through these pretty quick just so you kind of have an idea of the system, and then we're going to get to the good shit. We're going to run some demos. And we're going to see what we can do with it. So the first thing that we needed to do was we needed to actually get these routes from it. We need to have our client be able to give us the routes and get it over to our server so that it knows how to communicate with it. So what I did was I just implemented a simple macro to say, we'll get to it in a second, but in the client, you use this macro, put the routes in there, it'll send it over. How is it going to send it over? So there's actually a Coyote client that uses the using macro. In the using macro, you actually import the Coyote router, and that gives you the routes function. Now, the cool little bit that I did was just, and I can't remember who told me about this, it might have been James, was the Beam in Erlang gives you the power to load in modules into memory, and then you can send them to another node, and then recompile them on that other node. So basically what happens on the client side is the client takes that module, and you can actually give it a function. You don't even have to use that particular macro. You can actually just give it a function through the config to say, hey, this is where my routes are, and it'll call that. But it basically packages it up and sends it over. If you look down on line, I can see better on this screen than I can see on this screen, so bear with me. Line 86, we have a get code function. We get the object code for that module. We package that up, and we ship it off to the node that it services. Now with this, you can actually have multiple nodes. So say you have 4-liter servers, 5-liter servers, 10-liter servers. You can send it off to whoever you want. And then that code will actually be able to be run on the server side. It'll know the routes and it can register. But that's not good enough, right? What happens if it goes down? Well, we actually have a server watch. So when it goes down, we actually tell the client application, hey, this node is down. You need to start watching for it. As soon as it comes back up, send another message to re-register. And it just waits until the node comes back up. Now, of course, the node might never come back up, but it'll just keep waiting, and eventually it will or it won't. Now, on the Coyote server side, here's where we actually register the routes, and that's where we call on line 30, code load binary. We read in that code that was sent over from the other node. We basically compile it into memory, and then we run the code, and we pull the routes, we execute the routes function, and then update our routing table with the process ID that it came from and the actual request route that it has. Let's see. Now, here's where it got really interesting. When I was first doing this, everything seemed fine. I was testing it on my own. I was just running a little website and everything like that. Everything was good, no problem. What happens when you start having 100,000 things trying to go across here? You start getting a lot of back pressure. Now, I think it's come up a few times, at least I know today, GenStage. And I went back and forth on whether or not to implement GenStage, in part because, like I said, I've been working on this for the past year, and GenStage was in sort of a state of flux when I first started working on it, so it was kind of one of the last things that I implemented. And I wasn't even sure if I necessarily wanted to. And really, when I went to implement it, the first thing I noticed is it was slower. Well, of course it was slower. It's doing more work. It's not just servicing one request, it's actually trying to queue up a request, and it's actually trying to mitigate more larger requests. So it's if you have 100,000 requests coming in, which we'll see in a second, it keeps your server going. If you tried that without the GenStage, I don't think it would work. Now, you probably come up with another way to do it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that GenStage is the only way. It's just the way that I went. Now, I chose to use the consumer supervisor model. Basically, what happens is I have a producer relay process that runs, that when inbound requests come in, it actually starts up, the consumer supervisor starts up a single consumer for each request. And it manages those requests. So it doesn't matter how many come in, the actual, the relay itself handles that back pressure and only sends enough that it can handle, and then it kind of queues through. You get new processes for each one, and each one's handled individually, so if one dies, one dies. It's no big deal. Well, hopefully. I haven't tested that part out yet, so we'll just not worry about that, right? So here's our consumer supervisor, and it's really easy to set up. So basically we subscribe to that Coyote relay, so we know that any messages it produces, we're gonna actually go ahead and start up a new process. That process is gonna manage, or is gonna handle calling into our other application, getting the information, and then we also pass it the caller's PID so that we can get that information back to whoever sent it, which would be the leader server. Here's our request handler. I know that's a big chunk of code. Basically, what it's doing is it's going and checking the route bridge, which has all the routes. It goes and it finds it. When it finds one, that has the PID for that, which has been updated or maintained by the route table itself. And then it sends the message over to it, and then the response comes back, and it's delivered back to whoever sent the message originally. So in this case, it would be the leader server would actually go get the message and come back. Now, like I said, all this is configurable, but it's configurable in two ways. So the first way is by just using the config file. You can set up leader nodes, and if you don't set up any leader nodes, it just uses the default node, assuming that you're running in a single node. You can give it any number of ones. So this application that I wrote that we're going to look at here in a second, called Deadwood. Actually, you're going to kind of see a theme in like all these applications. If you know anything about the Wild West, we have Cripple Creek, we have Dodge City. The whole thing's in an umbrella project called Tombstone. No Wild West fans? Come on. You're killing me. All right. So here's our simple application. In our simple application, we have our routes macro where we're going to say we're going to handle this get route, and it's anytime you get a request for just slash, route it to, oh, I know how to handle it, send the message to me. And then we have our function on 26, which actually handles it. You can also pass in params. If params come in, they get passed in. Honestly, underneath the covers, all this stuff is basically just a gen server that you could do without the Coyote client, but the Coyote client kind of handles some of that boilerplate stuff that you'd have to set up. And then it relays a message back. Now, remember I told you, I don't care about what this stuff looks like hitting the web. All I care about is the data coming back. And in most cases, because I deal with a lot of back-end stuff, all I'm worried about is sending Java or JSON back. I'm not worried about sending HTML. I don't really care what it looks like. If you want to make it look pretty, put it in your presentation layer, and that's where it belongs. I'm not opinionated at all, by the way. All right, so here's our other client application, where we actually have one called menu for Deadwood, because Deadwood was a saloon too. So we have our menu, and in here we're going to get a list of items. If you notice here, I changed up intentionally those atoms in the beginning to show you that it doesn't have to be get, it just has to be something to be unique. So when we pass that, or when we pass get items slash food, we're going to get a list of items. Now, please don't hold me accountable for this code between lines 24 and 30, a little bit more than 33. Basically, I was just trying to do something that would take a little bit of time. I wasn't trying to, like, launch a space shuttle or anything like that. I just wanted to do some code. So we build the response. And what you'll see is on our get items, we just return the list of items in memory. That's all stored in an agent. I didn't use a database. Sorry. No, I didn't use a database. It's all stored in an agent. And then if you put items in there, it basically puts them in the agent and then returns the list, including the params that you sent in, and a little bit of extra superficial data, the average cost of the items on the menu, the total number of menu items, and stuff like that. Now, finally that's done. Are y'all ready to actually see a demo of this? All right, bear with me for a second because, oh, by the way, real quick, like my laptop. Funny story, real quick, I promise, there's only a couple of these, at least one more. So on the way here, I flew through Frankfurt. It was an overnight flight, please bear with me. I set my laptop down. Next morning, I go collect all my stuff, get it all going, I walk outside, go out of security, come back in security. I open up my bag, go to grab my laptop out. No laptop. Left it on the plane. Immediately freaked out, scrambled over to Lost and Found and everything like that. Guess what? They didn't have it. They didn't know where it was at. And what ended up happening was yesterday afternoon around 3 o'clock, I got an alert from iCloud that they found my laptop. It's sitting in a suburb in Frankfurt right now. By the way, it's been erased. I'm probably never going to see that one again. So guess whose laptop this is? I travel with my wife and kids. It's my wife's laptop. I love my wife. I love my wife to death. I love her more than anything. She does not know how to update her Mac. And when you're trying to get your talk put together, because you have to load up Elixir and Erlang and everything like that, doesn't have brew, doesn't have anything. Let's just say I haven't slept much the last few days. We need a mirror here. All right, can y'all see that? Kinda? I'll try to bump it up some. Okay, so what we have here, I've got actually 3 leader servers that we're gonna run, and I've got one, that Deadwood application that's just a back-end application. Some of the routes are serviced by the Coyote server itself, which is coming through Cowboy, we'll see that, and some of the routes are coming through Phoenix. I actually did pretty those ones up, so they'll look kind of nice. The other one is an API, which we're going to see through Postman, where it only services a part of the app, which is the menu part. We'll see that. So first thing we're going to do, I got to stop all this stuff too. So we're going to go ahead and start. So, as you can see, here's our Phoenix one. It looks a lot better than the Cowboy one because the Cowboy one doesn't have anything, any styles or anything like that. I did that intentionally so that you could see that there was a difference in the two. And also, here is the API one. As you can see, we have items in the API. If we go through, let's change this to a post, and I'll prove that here's the body. What else do you do in Sweden? Swedish meatballs. And you can see the response. We got the params that we sent, we got the items that we sent, and that was all going to the other one. Now, we're going to actually stop this real quick and go over here. Let's add 2, 3. This is our deadwood. And you can see our test 1, 2, 3 here. Yay, that worked. So we can actually, if you notice what happened, we did not restart the API servers. All we did was restarted the application server. And actually, if we take this down, if we restart this, you'll see no matching routes. This is our Cowboy one. It's been notified that there is no application to match those routes. So it just sends a response, no matching routes. I didn't pretty that up on here, though, so you just get a nasty message. Now, let's start this back up. We'll come back up. If you notice, I didn't touch the 2 leader servers, just comes up. Now, that's all fine and dandy, but remember we put GenStage in for a reason. Anybody can hit a site and get a response back fairly decently. So let's do this. So can y'all see that? Probably not. I've got 2 we're going to try here. 1, we basically take a list from 1 to 10. We cycle over that. We make this call. I'll show you the function real quick. Basically, all we do is grab a random number between 1 and, what did I set it to, 10,000, and then we generate a list and then sum that list and send it back over. Needless to say, that does produce a lot of numbers. So, or a really high set of numbers. So here we go with the let's do 10 first, just to show that it's working quickly. All right, so we got our numbers back. So GenStage, yes, the 10 of them wasn't too bad. Those came back pretty quick. But this one is 100,000. All right, so that'll be going a while. So let's come over here. Now I'll just refresh it. Still up. Still being able to service requests. So, actually, we'll do this. That's the server that it's actually running on. That's why I'm showing you the Cowboy one. So everything stays up and running. It's able to still continue doing all that calculations in the back end. GenStage is really what I was able to use this for, because each one of those starts up a separate process to manage those inbound requests and services it back using a send back to the process that called it. It makes it so that the site stays up. I can still hit other requests on that site and keep moving forward. It did finish, by the way. So, the suspense is killing me. Guess what? Time for another story. You guys liking the stories or not? Nice. It's a good way to break up the talk, right? I mean, come on. We can sit up here and look at code all day, or we can tell stories about coyotes. So the coyote and the skunk. Now, one day the coyote was walking, and he was very hungry. And he saw a skunk over there, and he said, "Oh, brother, I'm hungry. How are you doing? Are you hungry too?" And the skunk said, "Yes, of course." He said, "Well, there's some prairie dogs over there, and they're all playing around not paying attention. How about you work with me, and we'll get us a bunch of prairie dogs to eat tonight?" Skunk says, "Okay, I'm in. I'll do it. What do you need me to do?" He said, "Just go over there and play dead. I'll take care of the rest." So the skunk goes over closer to the prairie dogs and lays down and plays dead. The coyote walks over, and all the prairie dogs immediately look up and kind of freak out. The coyote says, "No, don't worry. Look, our enemy is dead. He's laying over there on the ground. We should all dance and celebrate, but don't look at it because you'll die too." And so they said, "Okay." And so they all started dancing around. He said, "You must keep your eyes closed or something bad will happen." And so they all are dancing around, eyes closed. So the coyote walks up and kills one. They all open their eyes and see the dead prairie dog. And the coyote says, "I told y'all not to open your eyes. See what happened? You better dance and close your eyes." So all the prairie dogs started dancing and closing their eyes, and he killed another, and then another, and then another, until he had killed all the prairie dogs. So the skunk and the coyote gathered up all the prairie dogs and decided to take them back and roast them. Well, as they're roasting them, the coyote got clever. He said, he's really hungry. So what he did was he said, "How about this, skunk? How about we race? We race to the bottom of the hill. If I beat you, then I get to pick the best of the prairie dogs. If you win, you get to pick the best." The skunk's not stupid. The skunk says, "Coyote, you're much faster than I am. There's no way I can beat you down there." And the coyote says, "I got it. I will tie a rock around my leg and so that I run slower. And then that way we can even it out a little bit." And the skunk says, "Well, if you tie a big enough rock around, I'll do it." So the coyote starts to tie around, and he says, "While I'm tying this, you go ahead and run on and get a head start, and I'll give you a head start." So as skunk runs away down the hill, the coyote ties on the rock and starts running down the hill. Well, the skunk gets kind of far ahead and he sees some bushes. And so he ducks into the bushes and waits till the coyote passes by. Now, as the coyote's passing by, of course, he's trying to run as hard as he can, and he's got this rock tied to his leg. Eventually, the rock shakes off, and he kind of takes off. Well, the skunk goes back to the fire where the prairie dogs are roasting, knowing that the coyote was going to try to get the best of them. And he takes the best ones for himself and leaves only 2 nasty little bony prairie dogs, and he puts them in the fire and cuts off the tails and goes back to the bushes and starts eating the prairie dogs. Well, coyote eventually comes back around and sees the fire, but no skunk. And he's looking in the fire, and he sees the tails, and he pulls them out, and he says, "Where did all of them go?" And he starts getting suspicious, thinking somebody's come and stolen the prairie dogs. Coyote's not always the sharpest guy, but in any case, so he's like, what's going on? Well, then the skunk appears at the top of the hill and throws the prairie dog's bones on him and says, "You tried to trick me, and I ate all of them." And he said, "You didn't save me any?" And he said, "There's the 2 in the fire. Eat those." And the coyote was just put out that he did not get anything. So the skunk actually outwitted the coyote. That's the end of that story. Now, how do those stories kind of tie in? Well, if you kind of notice, there was a little bit of a transition in them. But one of the things that the coyote is known for is the coyote is similar to what I guess the Norwegians, the Loki. He's kind of a trickster with people. He's a trickster with other animals. He usually tries to use his cleverness to get what he wants, but sometimes he lacks wisdom to do what he needs to do, and so he kind of always runs into problems. Now, of course, across the different Native American nations, the different coyote folklore is different. Some he's a little more helpful, like in our first story. Some in like the last story, he just tries to get the better of people, and when he does, it usually falls flat on his face. So be careful with your cleverness. I think I talk about this on the show quite a bit, where it's like, when I'm working, I don't want to be clever. But when I'm exploring, I do. When I'm trying to find new things, I'm trying to push the boundaries, like little things like reading code in from modules. Not necessarily something I want to do in my production application, but if I'm building a library or testing some functionality, it's great See how that works. Push the boundaries. See what you can do. I've never been a believer of, hey, we already have X. Why are you doing that? I think, actually, I saw a tweet. I wish I could have grabbed it and included it in the talk where somebody said, I'm about at the end of seeing, or what was it? The talks about how to build your own Heroku. Stop right there. I use Heroku so I don't have to build it. Why? I'm not saying you got to go use it in production, but hell, teach me how to build my own Heroku. Teach me all the things that I need to know, because that way when you go to use something like Heroku and something goes wrong, you have some background knowledge, you can actually figure it out. Now, I don't want to, it was a tweet, so I'm not picking on Heroku specifically, just it was a tweet. But there are some downfalls to do it yourself. For one, you're on your own if you need support. Chances are, yes, the community will try to help you, but you've gone your own direction, and chances are you've put a bunch of code in there that may or may not be good. But there's also a lot of upside. You can learn a lot. You can learn about the systems that you're working on. The one thing that I found in the 4 years that I've been working with Elixir and Erlang is that it's pretty deep, and there's a lot to learn. I think the only comparison that I can have is like when I was doing C# and .NET development, where it's like you could spend forever learning about .NET and the inner workings of it and how it all works and the different pieces of it and different aspects of the languages and things like that. And you can write code for years and never use chunks of it. Erlang feels very similar to that. Now, of course, you could solve similar problems that Coyote is trying to solve with something out of the box like RabbitMQ. That would work perfectly. Like I said, if you're on a single box and a single node and you want to use registry, that you could kind of work a solution that kind of works at the same. So there are options. But sometimes you get more out of exploring than you can out of using that out-of-box solution, like I said. Things that I encountered, like code loading, managing my nodes and processes, and just getting involved in GenStage. GenStage is one of those things I'd been hearing about it for a while, but I never really had a chance to get to it because I didn't have a need for it, but I got to use it in here, and I enjoyed it. That being said, I do plan on continuing Coyote and pushing it to be able to be a viable library that can be used in production. So you can check all that out. Check all that out on GitHub. I keep wanting to look back there. New Rugger 07, oh wait, hold on. This slide. New Rugger 07 on GitHub. Coyote is the library. I've also put the link for under Elixir Lang for GenStage. I think the big takeaway, though, from this is, challenge your thoughts on application development. Just because there's something out there already doesn't mean you can't try to build something different. Doesn't necessarily mean anybody's going to use it, but you're going to learn a lot from doing it. And only be clever when you're learning. Check out Coyote. Thank y'all.
Thank you very much. Any questions about the deeper meaning of the Coyote stories or something else?
Yeah, no, mine's a boring, non-Coyote related question. So what happens if I register more than one server with the same endpoint?
Yeah, right now it's first in. So whichever one comes in, if you put another one in there, it's going to start sending to the other application. That's something that I'm looking at doing, either sending a message back saying that there's already a route registered to that, or, hey, if you want to register, and for all I know, you're trying to send it somewhere else. But yeah, that is a part of it. If it's the exact same, it just ignores it and uses the one that's there. It assumes that you made a mistake, basically, and it doesn't add it to the routing table. If it's different at all, like if any part of it's changed, then it'll add a new one. So,
more questions? Seemingly not. And let's thank the speaker again.
thank you.